Let's get back to the situation in Syria now. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi making a surprise visit to Jordan with a bipartisan congressional delegation, meeting with King Abdullah to discuss security in the region and the fight against Islamic terror groups there. This as top U.S. officials defend President Trump's decision to withdraw troops from the war zone in northern Syria.
We take the primary effort, which is to make sure we keep the American people safe from the threats from radical Islamic terrorism wherever we find it.
But didn't the president put those gains at risk by pulling the troops out? We saw the fighting immediately.
I'm very confident that this administration's efforts to crush ISIS will continue.
Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano is with the Heritage Foundation. He joins me now. Colonel, thank you for joining us. First of all, how can the Trump administration prevent ISIS from regrouping and resurrecting? I mean, we abandoned the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds that did most of the fighting, to beat ISIS.
Well, I think there's two primary factors. One is nobody wants to see the ISIS or the caliphate come back. Not the Russians, not the Iranians, not the Assad regime, not the Turks, and certainly not the YPG. They got into this fight because the caliphate was killing them. So nobody has an interest in that. I'm not sure the caliphate has the capacity to actually recreate a physical presence in a way it did before. And remember, American forces are still in the region. You know, the line between Western Iraq and Syria is just a line in the dirt. In terms of conducting the ability to conduct counterterrorism operations in the region, I mean, theoretically, it could be just as robust as it was before.
So I know just already there have been reports of some 800 of those ISIS militants, if you will, who were being housed in those detention camps. So they've already escaped or were let loose because the Kurds couldn't really keep watch over those detention centers where they're being held. So are you, and I understand that perhaps they may not be able to recreate the caliphate, but what about ISIS regrouping in steam and in morale, as it were, amongst other people who are even here already who want to, you know, pay back the United States?
Right. Well, you need infrastructure to do that. So you have a commitment from both the Turks and the YPG to continue to detain them, and there are literally thousands of these. The ones that are running around, they don't have any infrastructure. I don't get me wrong, we were concerned about ISIS before this happened, right? Because there are ISIS and there's Al Qaeda running around. So it's not like anybody's sanguine about this, and it's entirely possible that the ones that escape, they'll try to exfiltrate. They'll try to go back to Tunisia, where many of them came from. Some of them might try to go back to Western Europe. So the guard's got to be up. But we've been working on dealing with foreign fighter flows in and out of the region for years now. So it's not a threat that we're unfamiliar with. So look, it's a bad day in Syria. There's no question about that. But U.S. strategy has primarily about keeping the problems of Syria in Syria. And honestly, I'm not sure if that was greatly put in jeopardy by the way things have unfolded between the YPG and Turkey.
I'm going to move on. I have other questions regarding that, but I want to go on to the fact-finding mission by the congressional delegation led by Speaker Pelosi. I mean, what do you think were the most pressing issues topping that agenda?
Well, I think it's perfectly appropriate for congressional delegations to do this kind of thing. They do it all the time. It's really important. Going to Jordan, super important, no question about that. Jordan is a keystone state. The stability of Jordan is really important to us. It's a little country, but it has more refugees in the country than the population of Jordan. Plus, it's a keystone state between Iraq and Syria and Israel. So good, important place to go. The Jordanians definitely have a dog in the fight, and so definitely good to consult with them. So on its face, the notion of a congressional delegation doing this is what they're supposed to do when they do appropriate oversight. And
you explained why Jordan is key, but what kind of guidance can King Abdullah impart, and is his advice reliable?
Well, I think it's important to have a Jordanian perspective. Look, they've got a real dog in this fight. Anything, something bad happens in Syria, there's a potential that can spill over into Jordan. And again, I think that is a real key focus of U.S. policy. In addition to watching out for ISIS and Al Qaeda, which we'll continue to do, the challenge is really to keep the problems of Syria in Syria. There was never a chance that the United States was going to end this civil war and negotiate the end. But we have to work with the Jordanians to keep those problems on the other side of the border.
problems in Syria. I get your point there, but then that leaves Assad back in power, who's, has been supported by Putin this entire time. So that leaves a vacuum there. But it's complicated. I have to keep going, though, because I want to ask you about Iran. In the midst of this fresh war that has broken out, what are you on high alert for as it pertains to Iran?
Well, Syria has always been in the Iranian and Russian orbit. That really doesn't change. There was never a chance that we were going to kick them out as long as they had the support of the Iranians and the Russians. The problem for the Russians and the Iranians is exactly the same. Where are they going to go? Any place they go, they bump into somebody. They either bump into Turkey, they bump into Israel. Matter of fact, we saw a situation where the Russians actually stood back and let the Israeli attack Iranian targets in Syria because the Russians weren't going to put themselves out to push the Iranians, defend the Iranians. Yeah.
Well, but do you feel then, without the presence of the United States there, is Israel really protected?
Well, people have to ask themselves the questions. How could a couple of 100 Americans jump in the middle of the Syrian civil war and orchestrate this incredible campaign to take down the caliphate? And the answer to that is really simple. All parties were happy for the Americans to do that. Nobody wanted to see the caliphate. But having said that, the notion that somehow those few hundred Americans could really determine the fate of the Civil War, that's incredibly unrealistic. And really taking them out of the picture, it doesn't really change the internal dynamic all that much.
Okay, Colonel Carafano, I'm going to leave it there because I have to move on. But thank you very much, very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay.